Hello, everyone, and welcome to Output Outcome Live. I'm just thrilled to have Andrew Sales here. Andrew is Chief Methodologist at Scaled Agile. And I think a lot of you obviously know and are interested in this Scaled Agile framework. It's been used by over 20,000 organizations and over 2 million people trained. So I think all of us still see it as the go-to scaling framework that's got this massive industry presence. And I think what's been so interesting is what Andrew and the framework team have been doing to evolve the framework. It's been, of course, evolving with software practices over many, many years now, but especially to evolve it around AI native practices. So, Andrew, before we dig into all of that, just please give us a bit of kind of your background, your journey, how you got here, before we dig into how AI is changing all of that. So,
yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you, Mick, for inviting me. Really looking forward to getting a chance just to sit down and talk about everything that's happened over the last, 3 months, 4 months since the summit in Amsterdam, really. I've been at Scaled Agile about 7 or 8 years now. Like you mentioned, I'm in the role of chief methodologist. So my responsibility there is making sure that we're always evolving the framework, incorporating new ways of working. Things have never moved faster than they move today. Previous to that, I was actually working at a safe partner. I was working at Rally and then Computer Associates, leading the services team. So I've been in the sort of change management, transformation space most of my career. And of course, at the beginning, it was all about going digital. Then Lean and Agile became the focus. And of course, as we know, over the last 3+ years, it's all been how can we help organizations with their AI investments?
right. And so let's just dig straight into that. So I think there's a lot of evolution going on with Safe, but AI native Safe, and I do encourage everyone to take a look at it because it is it's been fascinating for me to watch it evolve. But you're calling AI native Safe not just an incremental evolution, which of course is a tricky thing. Safe has been, I think, very good around versioning itself and making sure it's easy for organizations to adopt the changes and not deal with all that change fatigue, as it's a very obviously comprehensive and rigorous framework. But AI native Safe is a reinvention. So just tell us about that. Why the reinvention, and then of course, how are you helping organizations adopt it, given the amount of change that they're dealing with through AI?
Yeah, it's been really interesting because as you've seen, as you've been part of it and seen us kind of release iteratively over the last few weeks. We've taken a few different approaches with AI native Safe than we've ever done before. So as you mentioned, historically, we had these big numbered releases, Safe 4, Safe 4.5, Safe 5. And there tended to be a period of 2 or 3 years between them. And it was a fairly monumental activity to release. It was a big batch, as we talk about it. AI native Safe is very different. The proven practices that we were incorporating, the research, the thought leaders that we were building on, and the ideas that we were building out ourselves are moving so quickly that the idea of holding back and releasing a framework just doesn't make any sense. So with AI native Safe, the one thing we've done differently is we've built it iteratively. And we've also built it really publicly, Mick. So you've been seeing, and we talked about this earlier, every 2 weeks over the last 10 weeks, we've released another increment of the framework. The big picture, the roles, the events, the innovation pipeline. And that's really allowed us to incorporate the feedback that we're getting. Anyone who proposes that they have the single right answer in the AI native space just simply can't be telling the truth. We're all on a learning journey. So that new approach has helped us enormously. The other thing that we've done very differently is that we're choosing now to maintain 2 versions of the framework. So Core Safe is what you and the listeners would recognize as the previous version. It does have AI incorporated. Certain roles are using AI to, better carry out their activities, but it is a lean and agile framework at its heart. We'll continue to support that. Not all organizations are ready to move to AI native today. AI native Safe is a complete rebuild. It is not about just bolting on AI. The AI is baked in terms of how we talk about everything from the roles, the activities, the capabilities, everything that's in there. So because of that, we're going to support both versions and allow organizations to determine when it's the right time for them to start moving to AI native Safe. And I know we'll get a chance to talk about it today, but even the change journey is very incremental. Organizations can adopt it at their pace, in what order they want. But it shouldn't surprise you, at the heart of AI native safe is the AI native agile release train. And we're still seeing that those constructs are hugely important, even though they are evolving a lot in an AI native world.
Right. And before we actually, I want to dig into multiple constructs. I think that's one of the things I want to make sure that we cover here, right? And then of course, I realize we've got the Safe Summit coming up. I'm really looking forward to being there.
Yes.
The week of September 14th in San Diego. So I think we'll have everything unveiled with your keynotes and the others. But I want to touch on before we cover some of the mechanisms, which I think the good thing is you have been publishing these as well, right? I do love kind of the incremental publishing and the way you all have approached the community involvement. I was delighted to see an invite in my inbox a few months ago on looking at how some of the concepts and output to outcome were being reflected in some of the work that you were doing, and how we were seeing kind of some of the same trends in terms of how organizations are adopting AI and really some of the best practices and AI native ways of working. But obviously, I think a lot of people that we speak to are in this kind of paralysis mode, right? They think like, what's going to happen when the next frontier model changes? Is how do we actually build this? And it must have been and I got to see some of it, but a very interesting process to put a stake in the ground, saying, no, these are the things that you can leverage now, right? Models will evolve. The way that models and agents and AI engineering evolved as the frontier changes will obviously change. But I think you put a stake in the ground in terms of, again, some of these things that work today. And as you said, it's a reinvention. There's a significant departure. And you also involved a lot of industry experts in helping form this, as well as drawing the organizations that have effective AI native ways of working. So just tell us a little bit more about, kind of where that process got to, how you managed, I guess, is what's interesting, to get this thing out there in terms of collecting everything that we've learned over this. It actually hasn't been that long, right? In terms of AI native ways of working, and then how you see it evolving, kind of post Safe Summit.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because there's so many big topics connected. It's hard to know where to start. But let me start with the last piece you mentioned, which is how do we actually get a new version to market? And Mick, we're very privileged, and I never sort of stop reminding myself of how privileged I feel that we have a wonderful customer base and a wonderful partner network. And through the process of which you were part, we were really grateful that you were sharing some of your output to outcome learnings. Throughout the process, I mentioned that iterative development, we've had a large number of organizations either being contributors, here are things that we're doing today that have worked well, or being early adopters. We've seen what you've put out there. Can we actually test it and give you some feedback? The real risk with any methodology or anyone in a position where they're developing a methodology is you don't want to get stuck behind the desk. And, we've spoken for years about the importance of Gemba. And I think SAFE has always done a pretty good job, actually, of bringing together proven practices. It doesn't mean that sometimes you don't have to push the envelope a little bit, validate or invalidate, and then make adjustments. But throughout this process, we've had these customers who have been taking things out there, testing them, giving us feedback. And it meant that certain times during the last 10, 12 weeks, which was really the release period, we did have to make some pivots, and new things that we didn't anticipate have started to emerge. So that's number one. I'll just say one more thing that you triggered when you were in my mind when you were speaking there. I think there's a really interesting difference. You talked about the models and the changes and the hesitancy. If we think about lean and agile at scale, and we think about SAFE, what we call core SAFE now, it wasn't that there wasn't a technology story. There was a huge technology story. We talked about DevOps. We talked about building out operational systems. We talked about the need for platforms. Of course, it was all about predominantly software development. But there was an optionality, I think, for how deep organizations went into their investment in that technology. The big difference with AI native SAFE is twofold. Number one, whereas SAFE originally was just the SDLC, AI native SAFE is the whole product delivery lifecycle. So the scope is much wider. We might touch on that in a minute. But the second thing, Mick, the technology doesn't have that sort of separation that existed before. The technology and the ways of working are so tightly intertwined. Ways of working cannot exist unless the AI workflows, platforms, models, tools, systems are actually in place. And you'll see, and I know you've seen this when you've seen what we've released, the requirements on organizations to invest in things like data, innovation pipelines, accessible intent specifications and context. It's making it much more of a technology and business story combined than I think we've ever had before. So it's really interesting actually to see how that side of the framework's been developing as well.
Yeah, and that really struck me as we were, as I got to join the brainstorming and design sessions with you and the framework team, and that's what I really appreciated is that kind of end-to-end life cycle thinking that includes the business. I think there's a lot of guidance out there right now around how the SDLC is evolving, and of course it's evolving very quickly, right? But the Frontier Labs, Anthropic, just put out recently another thing on how they view the changing SDLC. But if you kind of look at it from the point of view of large scale portfolios, it is in the weeds, right? There isn't as much guidance and concrete guidance on how your entire, all the way from the company strategy and portfolio and top level value streams, to how you really create this effective feedback loop around what you bring to market much more quickly. Now that's being amplified by AI. How you actually wire those things together. And so I think to me, that is one of the most, one of the key aspects of AI native safe is that kind of end-to-end whole life cycle thinking rather than the more narrow SDLC focus. I also think I'd like to get your sense on this, but I also view that as more robust, right? The SDLC itself, the kind of the building aspect of things is changing more rapidly than the organization can consume. So tell us a bit about, take us through that kind of that end-to-end view of AI native safe.
It's interesting because you said something just there that I was on a call with a customer this morning, and we had a very similar discussion. If you think about some of the tools and applications that organizations are using to, drive some elements of their software delivery lifecycle predominantly, many of those come with their own proprietary methods. Many tools have best practices in terms of how to use them. And the question I got from the customer is, well, what does SAFE bring in over and above those existing best practices that maybe some of our vendors are providing as we start to adopt their tools and their systems? And it's exactly what you mentioned. Number one, it's the sort of the vertical view, if you like. How do we take everything that's happening down there in the teams and coherently talk about it as a portfolio? One of the things in relation to that, Mick, that we're trying to help customers do a lot is reframe AI as being a technology problem looking for an opportunity as being first and foremost a business opportunity. So trying to get portfolio leaders thinking in terms of where does the opportunities emerge? And then, of course, what technology can we bring to solve it? We're also having to educate portfolios and help them think about things like AI governance, token economics, how they do their investment planning in a world that is very, very different. So SAFE is definitely bringing that connectivity from the strategy to the teams. But the second thing I spoke to the customer about this morning is the breadth of the product delivery lifecycle is much wider than just what's happening in the teams in terms of, the day-to-day work they're doing, actually building out the outputs that we're delivering. A lot of the attention of AI tends to be on the activity there because we're seeing some absolutely profound acceleration and innovation. But we're also seeing now, incredible innovation in the product discovery space. We're seeing some wonderful innovation in what we can drive through our product marketeers, our product designers, our go-to-market activities. So SAFE is trying to create this sort of overarching surface where we can incorporate some of those more detailed practices that are more related to specific tools. But we're not seeing others necessarily providing that end-to-end life cycle where you can stand back and actually ask yourself the question, where is the bottleneck? Where is it worth investing in improving flow? Where actually are we not getting the feedback cycles we need? And just a final thought on that, because I know we'll come back to this as well. I know you've spoken about this, and I spoke about this in the webinar the other day. Competitive advantage used to look like how many features can we get to market in a certain time period. That competitive advantage has completely evaporated in my mind, or is close to evaporating in most marketplaces. The competitive advantage now is how can we extract value in the most efficient way from the work we do? And any sensible conversation about value needs to be looking at the entire PDLC and needs to be looking at the entire set of strategic options that the portfolio has. And that's why the scope, I would say, of AI native SAFE has slightly increased from what people's memories might be of SAFE being a framework predominantly designed for software development.
Yeah, I think it's, this is obviously where you and I have spent a lot of our discussion and around, the fact that it's building those outputs is, organizations got very good at creating these management systems, prioritization systems that were just focused on building the outputs. Kind of, I think somewhat ironically, Lean and Agile were always meant to be around this end-to-end big picture. But I think the way a lot of these things got deployed was really just around kind of the IT and technology teams, right? And there was this separation. So I think it's such a, obviously, think something we've both been so focused on, which is to make sure that organizations elevate that kind of, back to what whole product thinking and end-to-end value streams were, and business agility, all these things were always meant to be. And I think it's great to see that AI native safe, again, it's end to end, its whole life cycle from the beginning, rather than just being focused on the work of the teams, while of course making that work of the teams a first class entity. And by the way, I should also mention that thanks to our collaboration around this topic over I don't know, it's been many years now, but especially your early reads of output to outcome and all of that, the mechanisms in output outcome and AI native safe are fully compatible, right? Like we're actually people adopt using one or the other as a starting point. Are going to get to the same place. And of course, the way that you've elaborated all of this into all of the much more detailed practices and all of those additional articles and layers of detail that go well beyond the output outcome book is, I think, will be a huge help. Not to mention all these implementation roadmaps and helping the actual roles and competencies around this, I think will help people adopt these, outcome-based ways of working. But tell us, now, I want to dig into some of the key mechanisms. So, tell us about the outcome orientation in AI native safe.
Yeah, it's no, you're absolutely right. It's been really wonderful, actually, thinking about how to dovetail the research you've been doing, Mick. With the work we've been doing and the guidance that our customers kind of have been asking for. The biggest, maybe the easiest way to explain AI native safe is by the central paradigm. And central to AI native safe is outcome-driven product development. And if people were to go to the AI native safe big picture now, and if they were to look at that foundation layer, and if you remember, that foundation layer is where we tend to call out things like the core values, we call out the mindset, things like that. We've added to that foundation layer outcome-driven. So that is really the keystone, the central paradigm to AI native safe. And I think what really hits home, Mick, when I speak to folks about what we're doing in SAFE and what you're doing is that mantra that, we need to stop trying to manage outputs and we need to start managing outcomes. And what's really nice about the approach is that actually the two things are deeply linked, because organizations that are being successful here are releasing the constraints on outputs to allow innovation to emerge at all areas of the organization, knowing that they have the outcomes to help them drive key decisions around what to stop, what to pivot, what to persevere with. So I know a lot of people who'll be listening to this have supplemented SAFE over the years with an outcome view. We've talked about OKRs and how you can somewhat attach those to the framework if you want. Outcomes are central. The whole of AI native SAFE works on an outcome-driven model, whether it's portfolio outcomes, connecting to art outcomes, connecting down to the PI and team outcomes. And you'll recognize that, Mick, as an outcome tree. That's how you describe it in the book. That outcome tree is instantiated in the framework. It is how we both align and demonstrate our commitments, but most importantly, how at the end of the day we discern the value from what honestly at the moment is a lot of noise that is happening. Organizations are really struggling. I had one customer, and I've had a few of these conversations, they almost bring this up as a bit of a desperation piece. There is so much going on. There is so much activity. The teams are producing so much so quickly. How do we manage this? Again, we're not going to try to. We're going to try and harness it through the lens of outcomes. So the outcome-driven product development view is probably the biggest change that we've made. It is how the whole framework operates. One last thought on that, which is really interesting. I did a webinar this week on Tuesday, which was the story, Mick, around the implementation journey. Similarly to how we've kind of recast the framework as being outcome-driven, we're recasting the change journey as being outcome-driven as well. So we're now talking about outcome-driven implementation. So this is really how we're thinking about everything when it comes to AI native safe.
Yeah, and I think that the level of kind of structure and attention that you put into these implementation journeys, I think is key for organizations who are overwhelmed right now with all of that change. So I think we should touch on that before we close as well. But I want to just you unpack a little bit more about how some of the mechanisms around outcomes, and then how that actually impacts things like planning, because the way that we used to prioritize was really based more on outputs. But so just to look at one of the things that you talk about, and I do encourage everyone to check out Andrew's articles around AI native safe. In addition, they're obviously linked from, if you just Google for AI native safe, you'll get to them quickly. But one of the things that you talk about is actually ruthlessly stopping outputs that are not producing outcomes, right? At the same rate, that I think we recognize that as a good idea, but I think we've both experienced organizations who are just, especially large organizations, who are just very poor at stopping work, right? At stopping work that's not producing value, or connecting, actually understanding whether that work is producing enough value and having a fast enough feedback loop to recognize that. So take us through how you see that change happening, and basically putting in place mechanisms to help with that.
So it's interesting, isn't it? Because you mentioned that, at the beginning, you mentioned, Mick, that Lean and Agile has probably always been about that wider product view. But actually, if you think about some of the most, quoted elements of Lean and Agile, things like working software being the primary measure of progress, things like accelerating flow, things like reducing waste, we have kind of inadvertently programmed, I think, ourselves and organizations to really focus on the output as being the thing that we hold up of value. And when you focus on the output as being the thing of value, it becomes very hard to say, actually, I'm going to stop doing this. Because if you're the project manager that volunteers your project as the one that is no longer the most valuable, or something you need to pivot away from, what does that say about you as an individual, having worked on, quote, the wrong thing for a period of time? So I think the mechanisms previously made it very difficult. That's one thing I'll say. By now focusing outcomes as being the entry point into this product development flow, and by focusing the conversation around that, outputs are simply a means to an end. And you will see, and I'll come back to the mechanisms in a minute, because I don't want to miss that part of your question, but you'll see in AI Native Safe, when we talk about our AI innovation pipeline, previously we had two work items in Safe, if you remember. We talked about features and enablers. Features deliver business value, enablers deliver things like architectural investment, infrastructure, stuff like that. In AI Native Safe, we have 4 work item types. Now, of course, people can add other ones. But at a minimum, we say people need to be thinking in terms of features, enablers, experiments, and prototypes. So suddenly now, even the outputs have a language which is appropriate to saying, I'm going to run an experiment. And if the results are not what I expect, I'm going to change the path I'm on. So that is starting to change the behaviors. If you've got a backlog of features, Mick, and every one of those has, quote, business value attached, it feels like a failure not to make sure they all get to market. So that's one big change. The second thing, which is really interesting, is, we went into this with our eyes open as we did the research and spoke to customers, excited to see which elements of Lean and Agile and Safe people were moving away from and which they were persevering with. And I had a hunch and an interest in how cadence was going to be adapted in an AI native world. And I was wondering and asking myself the question, what role does cadence play? And by cadence, of course, I mean things like iterations. I mean things like PIs. I mean things like once a month we have a regular strategy review session. And I will tell you that from all the work we've done, and you've seen this now in AI Native Safe, cadence has never been more important. Cadence is the control mechanism by which these organizations, through all of the activity that is somewhat overwhelming them, get those inflection points to stop, review their key results, review the outputs, the experiments, and actually make meaningful decisions to move forward. And I know we'll probably touch on this a little bit, but there's this really interesting connection between cadence, in our mind, is actually at the end of the day what unlocks flow. If you want to let an AI native team run off, have autonomy and flow, you can do that, but you need the cadence to help steer the innovation that they're driving. And it's been great for me, Mick, to see that actually those tenets of Lean and Agile that people have put into their business are now becoming even more important than ever before. So in answer to your question, we're changing the narrative for how we talk about work. And we're really focusing on cadence as a mechanism for organizations to intentionally program in the fact that you will be making decisions around pivot and persevere on a regular basis. That is just how the operating model works. And if you're going to run these new sense and respond events effectively, expect to be doing that because that's how they're designed.
Right. And I actually think one of the most fascinating things is those sense and respond events. So let's dig into those in a moment. But Andrew, I couldn't agree more, right? I think that the failure mode I see most often right now is that the basically engineering teams and product development teams are moving very quickly. They already have a sense of their own flow experimentation. I think teams who are building things are realizing that it is now much easier to throw things away, right? But unless there's some cadence that's connecting that up to the strategy and the actual experimentation, which is, again, I think it's really important language that you're introducing, that the business is not really adapting to what the technology can do, right? And to what AI can provide. So I think this model that so many organizations ran on, which is that really the business has a separate cadence from what the technology teams are doing, just no longer works. So I think the way that you're approaching it is that teams can have continuous flow. And of course, that flow will be far accelerated, and they might be discarding more product development kind of features and services than they'll be keeping because of that fast rate of flow and their ability to quickly or much more quickly consume input from how these things are being adapted and in the end just hypothesis test. But unless you've got an operating model that allows the business to run at that same cadence, I think in the end, you're kind of getting at the crux of the productivity paradox, right? There's lots of tokens being spent, lots of stuff being built, but the business results are not there.
It's not to say that, look, from time to time, and Mick, in SAFe, we've talked about innovation and planning in SAFe for some time, the innovation, the IP iterations. It's not to say that great ideas cannot emerge sometimes from fairly free-form experimentation with tools and technologies. It can. But what we're trying to put in place is an opportunity to experiment and innovate inside a well-structured set of outcomes that we're trying to achieve for the business and our customers. And if you can just start to put some of those guardrails around, so what are the outcomes we're looking to achieve? It starts to structure that innovation and experimentation in a way that it can be managed effectively. And when I say managed, I mean harnessed for the benefit of the business and customers. And obviously the second thing, and that's why I said at the beginning, there are so many good topics related to this, aren't there? The other big thing that we're seeing differently, Mick, is there's some really serious consequences with unleashing teams to have complete autonomy in terms of ethical ramifications, data leakage, risk. So we're seeing a really interesting rebalancing, I would say, of, yes, we still desire to have autonomous teams. We know how important that is. But in AI native SAFe, they are working inside an AI governance framework. It has to be that way. Obviously, we're going to do our best to embed as much of those policies into the workflows themselves, so teams are just in the flow of work in their adherence. But we also need the builders, the people doing the work, to understand how to do it responsibly. What are the values that we as an organization are adhering to? What are the regulations we have to sign up to as well? So that's putting a really interesting lens on the agile aspiration of, how do we get full autonomy? And Mick, that one of the benefits of SAFe has always been to try and balance the centralized governance with the decentralized execution. And suddenly in the age of AI, even organizations, I think, who previously might not have seen SAFe as a good fit for them, are now starting to think about adopting it because they do need that governance when it comes to AI. Otherwise, they're going to find themselves in all sorts of trouble. So we've been set up quite nicely for that. Innovation has to happen inside those guardrails.
So I think, and that is part of the crux, right? You want that speed, but you still need that governance. And this goes, beyond. It touches on ways of working, touches on security, touches on data and access and all of that. So, and of course, I think that the key thing is that you want that. I guess what I wanted you to dig into right now and get to these, like, what are these new sense and response events? But what does this new world of planning look like, right? Is PI planning, should it still be quarterly or should people be PI planning every 3 hours now? How do you actually see connecting that, really what's been these completely disparate cadences, I think, and that have become more disparate as you've got kind of AI native engineering rolling out. How do you see, in the end, the organization synchronizing around this continuous learning, hypothesis testing, and product development process?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I'll run you through those two big changes. I'll talk about briefly now how PI planning has evolved, and I'll talk about the new sense and respond events. Let me just caveat that to remind folks that what we said about the beginning, we're committed, Mick, to maintaining core safe and AI native safe alongside. And I've already spoken to many organizations who in some parts of their business, they're going to start evolving to be AI native. In others, for many reasons, it makes sense to maintain core safe. So when I describe how we've evolved PI planning, what I'm really describing is a brand new event. PI planning continues to live in core safe. AI native safe takes a very different approach. And I'll just caveat what I'm going to say also one more thing, which is kind of fun. When the team and I were working on this, and you've heard me talk about this, my instruction to the team is I had some design principles for AI native safe, and one of them is we have to build for the future. It's really easy to fall into the trap. Safe is 15 years old now, Mick, and we've evolved it along the way. It's easy to feel that there are some things that are just not changeable because they've always been that way. So we needed to challenge ourselves. And nothing, I think, is more representative of safe than PI planning, right?
Well, I think some things didn't change for 14 years. They didn't. They're just changing now. So.
For good reason. Yeah, for good reason. So PI planning, let's just touch on that one. So think about an agile release train. An agile release train brings a couple of things. Yes, it brings the structure. Yes, it brings some roles. But what it also brings is a cadence. And that cadence is what we call PIs. We still call them PIs. But the cadence is really specified by the PI starts with what was your PI planning event, and then it tended to end with what you call your inspect and adapt. And along the way, you had things called system demos. The agile release train, the AI native art, still brings that cadence. What we're seeing in the AI native space, first of all, is that we need the consistency at the art level across the teams, and I'll talk about that in a minute. At the team level, when we get to that in a moment, there we are being much more adaptable in terms of recognizing that different teams need to build a way of working that fits for the work they do. We're giving them a scaffolding. It's called align, sense, and respond. But we're allowing the teams to have much more autonomy, if you like, to work out their appropriate operating model. But for the agile release train, there has to be that consistency because the challenge there is how do you integrate work across multiple teams? So at the start of a PI now, instead of PI planning, which was a 2-day event, we have an event called PI outcome planning. No surprise there, right? PI outcome planning. It's a 1-day event. And the question as to why it's 1 day, the answer is not, Mick, just because, we wanted to make it shorter. The answer is the focus has changed. It is not feasible, nor have we ever tried to do this necessarily, but it is even less feasible in an AI native world to predict the results of all the experiments, the prototypes, the features we're building, and project 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks into the future, how we're going to fulfill our commitment to realizing the outcomes. So the 1-day PI outcome planning is not about how do we take features and plan those into iterations and break those down into stories for the next 8 to 12 weeks. PI outcome planning is an alignment meeting. It's what are the outcomes we're looking to deliver this PI, and those will be a subset, or if you like, related back to the longer term art outcomes that we have. And then across the teams that we have and their capabilities, how can they all contribute to achieving those outcomes? We might choose to identify some key experiments we're going to run, but what we build this event around, Mick, is milestones. So the view of milestones and how we use them in AI native safe is much more sophisticated now. We talk about learning milestones. We talk about synchronization milestones. We talk about release milestones, of course, and fixed date milestones. And what we're going to ask the teams to do in that 1-day outcome planning event is not only commit to the outcomes that they think they can deliver, but also identify some of the key milestones throughout the PI, some of those key learning points that we just spoke about, where we're probably going to make some big decisions. In a week's time, we're going to get back together. We're going to look at the results of all the experiments, and we're going to make a decision of the best way forward. So, and as you can imagine, the event, if you think about PI planning, Mick, originally we had the PI planning board, the art planning board. It was about features, the red string, building a plan. In PI outcome planning, we have a PI outcome planning board. The board is built around not features or outputs, it's built around outcomes. When are we going to deliver them? Which teams are responsible for what? And what are the milestones that turn that into an executable plan? So completely different lens. And because we're not going deep into the features in the event, it allows us to focus the discussion in a single day. Important to note, we still do have the learning point halfway through the day where management go away, they look at the draft plan, they come back, they bring the adjustments, and then the teams iterate. Out of that, we get a commitment to the outcomes we're going to deliver both at the team level and the outcomes we're going to deliver across the PI as well. So that's a brand new event. The sense and respond, let me talk to that very quickly. So in CoreSafe, we had system demos, typically once an iteration where teams would show the integrated product they built. And at the end of the PI, we'd have an inspect and adapt, a bit more like a root cause analysis workshop. Sense and respond happens on a cadence, at least once an iteration. Sense and respond is where we're bringing together the entire Agile release train, and we're replacing those two events I just mentioned. We're replacing system demo, we're replacing inspect and adapt. And sense and respond is very clear. You spend the first half of this event sensing. We're going to look at the results from telemetry. We're going to look at our key results. We're going to look at customer feedback. We're going to look at results from experiments. And then the second half, respond. And this is back to what we said. We are building into the framework the mechanism to make key decisions. So respond is, what do we do with those results? What are the decisions we need to take? How does that change our plan? And how do we adjust then the work we need to do before the next sense and respond event? The sort of overarching framework here, Mick, is align, sense, respond. Align, sense, respond. At an art level, PI outcome planning, sense and respond events regularly. At a team level, they're also aligning, sensing, and responding continuously as well. So you're right, those two events, people will see some familiarity in them, but they have been reinvented. They've been reinvented around everything we just spoke about. But importantly, they happen on a cadence. Cadence, from what we're hearing from our customers, and we're seeing the organizations that are doing AI best value cadence now more than ever before.
Right. And I think the way I see it, let me know if this is a fair characterization, but outcome planning actually gives teams more autonomy on outputs, right? And if you want that autonomy, that empowerment, you still need to make sure that you're delivering outcomes, right? If you're looking for, let's say, more investment, more token budgets, more like team growth, you need some kind of alignment mechanism and feedback loop. But I guess, do you see this as giving teams that autonomy and outputs that I think AI requires?
I think there's two pillars to this. So one is the outcomes do just what you said. They give teams the freedom in between these sense and respond events to experiment appropriately for the outcomes we're trying to achieve, knowing that whatever happens, we're going to come back and make some decisions as an Agile release train that best serve us. But coming back to the governance piece, Mick, I think when we say governance, people think of controls that slow us down. The organizations that we've been speaking to, the ones that really get AI governance, not only do they get it in terms of they realize that it is an enabler to speeding up work, a team working inside some very clear AI governance guardrails will always be able to go quicker than a team that is trying to find their way through, a lack of understanding what they're allowed to do. Secondly, the organizations that really get it, they're building the governance into the work systems themselves. So not only making them explicit in terms of, a team knows what they can and can't do, the platforms on top of which we are building our workflows have those guardrails built in so teams can work effectively and confidently, knowing that there are the checks and balances to, stop ship and stop the system if spend is accelerating too fast, if we're going outside the boundaries of how we're allowed to use data, if we're doing things that we're not meant to in terms of the regulations that we're signed up to. So yes, the outcomes are giving them permission to experiment. But I think alongside that, I can't stress the governance piece enough, as that is also the other security that is provided that lets them innovate very safely as well.
Got it. And then let's dig in. So I think, again, that you've kind of got the right scaffolding to help the teams run at a much faster pace. And I think that governance piece is, I think the way that you've approached it is absolutely key to that. Because of course organizations want to empower these teams, but in the end, again, they need to start seeing business value for the very significant investments and AI spend that's happening. Tell us now about how you see kind of that builder capability evolve, and really what's going to happen at the team level. I think, and output to outcome, I kind of punted on that. I said teams will probably shrink. You might get one pizza teams, you might get 2-person teams. That's uncertain, but I think you've provided kind of more guidance on how to think about that. So could you take us through that?
It's the team space is really interesting, and that's one of those where, there's always a balance when we're building a new version of the framework, Mick, because it's so pleasing to me that people enjoy reading our articles, they put them to work, and they look at what we're writing, knowing that we're doing a lot of the work to research best practices, as we mentioned earlier. And it also means when we make statements about how things are changing, there's going to be an impact and a ripple effect, and people take those seriously. So when we started to research what was changing in the team space, so yes, number one, teams do look like they're getting smaller, just to get that out of the way. No surprise, individuals have access to capabilities beyond which they previously had access through the application of AI. What was really interesting, if you think, Mick, about where Agile's been the last 15, 20 years, we typically had Scrum teams, Kanban teams, maybe a mixture of both. And both of those team types had, particularly Scrum, had very well-defined roles. When we started to research this, simply put, the roles in the AI space have just not settled down.
Right.
We were seeing things like product architect, product engineer, AI product engineer, all these different sort of manifestations of different roles. But actually, that played really nicely into the story we wanted to tell. So when you look at the team guidance that we have in AI native teams, we've moved away from talking about specific roles to talking about capabilities. And we've identified 3 capabilities that we can see as being, somewhat providing full coverage of everything a team needs. So there are builder capabilities. And what's really nice about that term, Mick, is it doesn't mean just your software developers. Anyone in the team at any one time can be a builder. Whether it's a product marketeer using AI to build out campaign assets, whether it is a software developer. So there is the builder capability. We have the product capability. And the nice thing about the product capability is it allows us to tell the story that inside the team, there's got to be one or more individuals that have that close understanding of what it is that we're tasked with building. Connection to the customer, understanding of the product that we're being asked to deliver. And obviously, you can imagine, Mick, people like product owners fulfill that capability, product managers. And the final one is domain expert. And we're seeing this, of course, a lot in the industries that we work in. If you're in healthcare and you've got a team building some kind of healthcare device or service, having a clinician as a domain expert, either permanently or shared across that team, provides something that neither the builder nor the product capability provide. I really like this lens. When you think about builder, product, domain expert, it allows organizations to put in place the roles that are suitable for their context to fulfill the capabilities. So domain expert, we've had lots of questions about, does every team still need a Scrum Master? We might come to that in a bit.
We just got that question in the chat,
some
actually.
teams.
So yeah, does every...
Oh, have we?
Harm just asked
okay,
that.
well, I can...
Good timing.
I promise you I did not see that. So some teams absolutely need... Well, let me say 3 things here. Number one, the way we describe the capabilities, some Scrum Masters will choose to move between being builders, domain experts, maybe some of them have product expertise. Some teams will, as a domain expert, need a Scrum Master to help them with some of the hands-on coaching and performance unlocking that they require. I will say something quickly in answer to the question there. And maybe we'll get to this, but I know this is a deep conversation. There's a brand new role in AI Native Safe. It's called AI Value Architect. That is going to be a very interesting surface for some Scrum Masters to explore. But let's just park that for a minute. So builder, product, domain expert, those are the capabilities. Fulfill them with the roles that are appropriate. One or more people can subsume one or more capabilities. It's a lovely way of letting people move outside of strict role definitions. And it recognizes that in this world, Mick, everyone at some point is a builder when it comes to AI.
Yeah, and I think obviously that's absolutely key contribution and an approach that organizations need to adapt, right? Is to understand how all these new builders that weren't builders before can be incorporate into the flow and driving outcomes.
Yeah.
So, but I do want you to dig into that. Was actually going to be my next question. So the Scrum Master questions that I think is one I'm hearing a lot as well. But the AI value architect, is this a temporary role? Like, is it once teams become more AI native? Just unpack that for us, please.
Yeah. Let me do a terrible thing and add one comment to the last point, because you just made me think of it, and then I'll jump to your question. Just closing that team piece out, Mick. So if you think about, how we used to talk about team processes previously, we had the roles, and there would often be quite a strict, way of operating the team. And when I say strict, I just mean, well defined. As people on this call and listening, explore the AI native team guidance, you'll see that at the team level, whereas the art was about cadence, the team is about flow. And at the team level, we mirror those three key activities: align, sense, and respond. And we've got a lovely example in the article of what does it look like for a team to work out their own manifestation of align, sense, and respond events. So if we were in a team, Mick, with a few others, the guidance would tell us that we need to align regularly, sense regularly, and respond regularly. It will give us examples of how we might do that, but it will be up to us as a team to evolve what we want that to look like for us. So that's how we're trying to give the teams autonomy, depending on the products that they are building. They need to build their workflow in a way that makes sense. So anyway, that's just closed off that point. Let me answer your question about the value architect. And I know I was chatting to you about this just earlier. I'll give you a quick lead into this. If you think about CoreSafe, Mick, we've talked about the need for change agents for so long. And we're so blessed to have a wonderful SPC community as an example of one important group of change agents. In the AI space, we're seeing something very interesting emerge. Some people are choosing to remain and deepen their skills in, let's just use the example of AI native safe. I am a change agent when it comes to helping the organization adopt AI native safe. For them, we're seeing a big deepening in what you and I would recognize as system thinking skills.
Yeah.
So on one side, we need someone and a group of people who are experts at coaching systems thinking, a little bit like the traditional SPC we spoke about. On the other side, we're seeing the emergence of a new type of change agent, one that coaches AI adoption. We call that person the value architect. So the value architect is deep, deep, deep in AI knowledge, committing to keep their learning up to date. They can be hands-on with teams, helping them adopt and extract, the most benefit from AI. On the other side, we've got those that are coaching systems thinking, who are taking a bigger systems view, looking at things like the culture, looking at things like organizational adaptability, that kind of thing. So point one, the value architect arose because I don't think there is necessarily a single type of change agent anymore. There's those two sides to it. Now, some people, of course, are just incredible at everything and taking both of those sides and being able to do it as a single person. So when you look at the value architect, you can't miss it. It's right in the middle of the big picture. We describe value architects as finding themselves either attached to a team. Very often, they might be attached to a group of teams. Maybe you have some attached to the entire Agile release train. So a single AI native art might have a collection of 3, 5, 7, 10 value architects. And they're the individuals that have key responsibilities in not only helping us adopt AI, but really bridging the business and technology discussions. And through some of the training that we've been providing them, Mick, we're trying to help them also become experts in what does it look like to facilitate an AI-empowered solution or product development lifecycle. Because there's so many things you have to take into account: the data, the ethics, the risk, for example. We are seeing that Scrum Masters, team coaches who have that really amazing expertise in communication, in bridging business and technology, who know what it's like to bring people together and facilitate a process, are starting to step up as really wonderful candidates for this role. Other candidates might be RTEs, SPCs who want to move across. We're seeing people from product and system as well. But I just want to kind of reiterate that point. I think in this new world, as we start to help organizations adopt AI native safe, you need people who are coaching systems thinking. You need people who are coaching AI adoption. And it's okay for those to be two different groups of change agents. Of course, they're working very, very close together. I'm going to talk a lot about this actually at the summit it's difficult, isn't it, Mick, with how quickly AI is advancing to require any one person to be able to know everything about everything all the time, right? So that's why I think this pattern is very useful.
Yeah, and Andrew, you just made me realize a success pattern I'm seeing is organizations who have these AI value architects at multiple levels within the portfolio, right? Where you will actually have a very senior, could be a CTO, a CIO, a head of a CPTO, whatever the role is, but you have that person who's very much taking this type of change agent role, and then empowering kind of basically that roll down to the team level. So, the other thing I've noticed is if you don't have enough senior sponsorship, so basically, again, room in your operating model for these change agents, you're going to move more slowly. They're there at the team level, right? Chances are you've got people who are excited and really motivated by what they're able to do with cloud code, with agentic engineering, and so on. But do you see, I guess, how do you think of that? Does the organization need these AI value architects all the way up?
So it's such an interesting observation, and I'm seeing exactly the same thing. So when you look at the AI native safe big picture, Mick, we always have the challenge that we have to put the icons somewhere. So the icon's in the middle, it's on the Agile release train. But if you get into the literature behind it, the guidance article, exactly as you mentioned, these roles cascade up. And let me add two interesting things that have been shared with me that we're seeing as well. Think about how fast the technology is advancing. You sort of turn off for a few days, you come back and suddenly you feel like you're out of date yourself, right? The things are moving so quickly. So if you think about what it meant for leaders to feel comfortable with lean and agile at scale, imagine what it feels like not only now to remember that, but to add to it this incredible advancing tidal wave of AI. So the value architect plays a critical role in helping that adoption across the portfolios. And in some of the training that we provide for the leaders, we talk about something called AI intuition. It's a really nice phrase because what we're not trying to do there is develop deep expertise that is not relevant to the job they need to do. But if you're making decisions about AI strategy, AI investments, AI budgets, you need an intuition that is enough hands-on. So our leadership training when it comes to AI native gets them hands-on with AI. It can't be any other way. So the value architect plays a critical role helping them to develop that AI intuition. But the second thing that you made me think of that I wanted to share, that sort of dichotomy between deep in AI and deep in systems thinking or change management, we're seeing that also in some of the more formal groups that are being set up. We're seeing most organizations that we work closely with evolving their existing lean agile centers of excellence to now include responsibilities around the AI adoption, which is fantastic. All the things that they're so good at, Mick, shared best practice, maintaining standards, accelerating adoption through really highlighting success patterns. Alongside that, we're seeing organizations set up what they're normally calling an AI council. So this is often a separate group to the LACE and very focused specifically on things that are organizational wide. What are the AI regulations that we must enforce? What are our policies on responsible AI? So even at that sort of organizational level, you're seeing these two structures evolve, a LACE alongside an AI council. So I find it fascinating. It's a really fascinating change to, how we've seen organizational change operate over the years. It's really interesting. It goes back to what we said at the beginning. The technology is not separate. The technology is what enables the goals that we're trying to help them achieve through the change journey. So this connection of the technology and the new ways of working, I don't think has ever been more intertwined than it is today.
Right. And I think this, your point on this AI intuition, I'm actually seeing this as one of the most important success factors, and just in terms of what good looks like right now in organizations, where they've taken the time to develop senior, like at every level, but also senior leaders, AI intuition, right? The example, Peter Jordan, who's the 2-week group case study, he's the group CEO for 2-week group. He ran an offsite, he talks about this on the podcast, for I think it's 2 or 3 days, where he actually had every single person, like finance leaders, CFO, human resources leaders, build out agents to kind of rebuild a travel agency of the future, but completely
Amazing.
hands-on, right? So I think what you and the framework team are bringing this is actually a formalization of these kinds of best practices, which is just great to see. So we're nearly at time, and I guess I'm going to ask you a tricky, maybe an impossible question, but so fast forward 3 years. Which part, we now have, I don't know, let's say there's some super intelligent models that we may or may not have access to in the public domain. But there's just been obviously just a huge evolution in terms of kind of these building capabilities and just of frontier models. Like which parts, because I think this is one of the hardest problems that you've been solving for, which parts of AI native safe do you think will change more? Which parts do you think are kind of more resilient to the thing that everyone's kind of paralyzed by, which is like, what happens next?
Yeah. So that's an impossible question. No, I'm just kidding. But look, the honest answer is, who could have imagined things would have moved as quickly as they moved to where we got today? So future is very difficult to predict, but I will say a couple of things. I think it's a really interesting question. When you look at AI native safe, you will see that even in our discussion around things as simple as workflows, we are cognizant that some of those workflows, and of course, over time, even more of them, will be, fully autonomous. Obviously, we have a lot to say about human in the loop, and that's an important part of the story. But more and more, of course, we're going to see more opportunity for more workflows to be made autonomous. But here's where I think the value then, the question I like to ask myself is, as all organizations start to converge, because you do see a convergence, and if you think about what you've talked about, Mick, in terms of, these deployment phases, and, in your book, you've talked about the tipping points, as organizations start to converge where it becomes more difficult to necessarily see the difference between what is this one finance company doing from this finance company, because they all have access to the same models, they all have access to the same technologies, I think we're going to see an opportunity there to elevate even higher than we do today the value of human intervention. And I know we haven't spoken about it much on the call today, but we have a strong kind of layer that underpins everything we do in AI native safe, which is what we call a human-centric AI culture. And our job is almost saying to organizations, look, if you invest in the technologies and you do it appropriately, that will be there for you. What we're trying to help you do, knowing that you have this incredible workforce of expertise, context knowledge built up over years, is how can you leverage this alongside everything that's happening in AI to create a competitive advantage? And I think there will be a time, Mick, where actually a visible human element to the features that we're delivering, to the services we offer, becomes an even stronger differentiator than we might be seeing today. And we've had examples of this in the past as organizations have digitized every step of their service or their operational workflows. People started to value the chance to speak to a real person, right? We know that story. Yeah. So I think the job for us in SAFE will always be twofold. Given that the technology is advancing at such a pace, how do we let you sift through that and find where the business value lies? For us, this is a business problem to solve, not a technology problem. The technology will always be there. And secondly, you will have heard Dean say this many times, Mick, for us, it's all about the people. SAFE is all about the people. How can we help you as a group of leaders and executives harness the people you have, develop the right capabilities that they need so that they become the difference between you and the next organization, knowing that actually the technology, I think, is going to start to look very similar from one company to the next. And I think that is the most important journey for us, is solving that people challenge and helping to demonstrate the value that all of them can provide to make organizations really thrive.
I love that, because in the end, this is all about human-centric outcomes. So, Andrew, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're at time, but let us know where people can find you. Of course, SAFE Summit. I'm so looking forward to that. But in terms of following your work, where should we look?
Yeah, please, of course, feel free to connect directly with me on LinkedIn. But do know that if you go to the Scaled Agile Framework site, we put out a blog every single week, Mick. We keep people up to date on everything that's happening. If you haven't been following along, if you go and look at those blogs, you will see that for AI Native Safe, there was a nice 6-video series you can go back and watch and see exactly what we've released over the last 10 weeks. And Mick, like you mentioned, SAFE Summit San Diego, 14th to 18th of September. Please don't remind me how few days it is till we get there, because I've still got some real work to do to be ready, but I know I'm going to see you there as well.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Andrew.
Thanks, Mick. Thanks, folks.